The sun hung low over the dry fields, painting the small western town in shades of gold and dust. Horses moved slowly near the stables, their shadows stretching long across the ground. In that quiet town lived a man named Elias Mercer, known simply as Eli. He was a cowboy through and through, calm, strong, and silent most of the time. People said he had seen things in his life that made him older than his years. He never spoke about the war he once fought in, or the friends he had lost. Instead, he spent his days repairing fences, breaking wild horses, and keeping to himself. Eli believed in simple things: hard work, fairness, and keeping one's word. He never looked for trouble, but he didn't walk away from it either when someone innocent was being hurt. The townsfolk respected him for that. One evening, as Eli was leading his horse to the water trough, he noticed a woman walking slowly down the dirt road. Her name was Maria Alvarez, though most people in town called her May. She was new to the area, having arrived a year earlier with nothing but a small trunk and a quiet look in her eyes. She worked at the livery, caring for the animals with gentle hands. Though she smiled often, there was always a touch of sadness behind it, like someone carrying a story too heavy to tell. Eli had seen her once tending to an injured horse. Her patience had impressed him. The way she talked to the animal, soft but firm, told him she understood pain, both the kind that hurts the body and the kind that wounds the heart. Over time, they had shared small conversations, a polite greeting, a nod, a few kind words about the weather. That was all. Yet, Eli had begun to notice the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, as if afraid someone might appear. That someone was Caleb Hardin, a man who owned most of the land around town. He had power, money, and the habit of using both to get whatever he wanted. Caleb was handsome in a cold way, always wearing fine clothes and a cruel smile. Many feared him, and those who didn't fear him usually owed him something. Caleb had once offered Maria a job on his ranch, but she had refused politely. No one knew exactly what had happened after that, but rumors spread that Caleb didn't take the rejection well. He began to visit the livery more often, always finding some excuse to stop and talk to her. Maria kept her distance, answering with few words and keeping her head down. Still, his visits grew bolder. Eli noticed the change. One afternoon, he saw Caleb talking to Maria near the stable gate. Her shoulders were stiff, her hands clutching a saddle strap as if she needed something to hold on to. Caleb leaned closer, saying something that made her turn pale. When Eli called out a greeting, Caleb gave him a mocking look and tipped his hat. Maria quickly walked away. That night, Eli couldn't shake the image from his mind. He wasn't the type to meddle in other people's business, but something about the situation felt wrong. He had seen that kind of fear before, the kind people tried to hide. The next day, word spread that Caleb had been boasting in the saloon, saying he was done being patient. He spoke loudly so others could hear, that he'd mark his claim one way or another. Men laughed nervously, pretending they didn't understand what he meant. But everyone knew. Eli's jaw tightened when he heard it. That evening, he found Maria near the well behind the livery. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept. "Ma'am," he said softly. "You all right?" She hesitated. "I will be," she replied, though her eyes said otherwise. "Caleb's been talking," Eli said after a pause. "You might want to stay close to town for a while." She gave a small nod, her voice almost a whisper. "I can't run forever, Mr. Mercer. If I leave, he wins again." That single line told Eli more than any long story could. He realized then that Maria had been running for a long time. From fear, from control, from men who thought they could own her. And now she was tired of running. The following morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Eli saw Caleb and two of his men walking toward the livery. Their boots stirred the dust, their faces set with intent. Eli stood near the fence, his hands resting on the top rail, watching quietly. He didn't move until he saw one of Caleb's men grab Maria's arm. That was enough. Eli stepped forward, his voice calm but cold. "Let her go," he said. Caleb turned, smiling in that arrogant way of his. Stay out of this, Mercer. Ain't your concern. Eli took another step closer. I'm making it my concern. The man holding Maria laughed, but he didn't release her. Caleb's smile widened. She belongs with me now. Best you keep your distance. Eli's hand moved to the knife at his belt. It wasn't a fancy weapon, just a worn, sharp blade he used for ranch work. But in that moment, it became something else. The air went still. Even the horses quieted as Eli's voice cut through the silence. One more mark on her, he said evenly. I warned you, and I'll cut you down before you take. The words were not shouted. They were spoken with such quiet certainty that even Caleb's men hesitated. Maria's eyes widened, not in fear, but in shock. No one had ever stood up for her like that before. Caleb's smirk faltered. For a long second, no one moved. Then he laughed, a dry, bitter sound. You're making a mistake, Mercer. Maybe, Eli replied, but I'll sleep better for it. Something in Eli's eyes made Caleb step back slightly. The man holding Maria finally let go, pretending it was his own choice. Caleb glared at Eli, then turned sharply and walked away, his boots kicking up dust. The crowd that had quietly gathered near the saloon watched in silence as he left. Nobody said a word. Maria stood frozen, breathing hard, until Eli spoke softly. You best go inside, ma'am. Lock your door tonight. She nodded and whispered, Thank you. Eli tipped his hat and walked away, but his mind was far from calm. He knew men like Caleb. They didn't forget humiliation. They came back, harder and meaner. That night the town seemed unusually quiet. The wind carried the smell of rain and dogs barked in the distance. Eli sat on his porch cleaning his blade, his thoughts heavy. He remembered a promise he had made years ago to a dying friend, that he would never let another innocent suffer if he could help it. He didn't know how far Caleb would go, but he knew this wasn't over. A man like that wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted, or until someone stopped him. At dawn, Eli heard hurried footsteps outside his cabin. It was Tom, an old friend who worked near the mill. Eli, he said breathlessly, Caleb's bringing men to the Alvarez place. He says she owes him money and he's taken her land. Eli stood, his expression turning to stone. When? They're leaving now, Tom said. Eli strapped on his worn leather gloves and reached for his hat. The morning light caught the edge of his knife as he slid it into its sheath. He didn't rush. He simply said, Then I'd best be there first. The horse beneath him snorted as Eli mounted and rode out toward the edge of town. The wind pushed against him, carrying the faint sound of thunder and the memory of his own words. One more mark on her, and I'll cut you down before you take. The story of that moment spread through the town before the day was done. Some said Eli Mercer had gone too far. Others said he was the only man left with any courage. But for Maria, it meant something more. It meant someone finally stood between her and the darkness she'd been running from. As the dust rose behind him and the first drops of rain began to fall, Eli knew the sun would rise that day on more than just a new morning. It would rise on a reckoning, and that reckoning was coming fast. The morning was quiet, too quiet for a town that usually woke to the sound of wagons and roosters. A light rain had passed, leaving the ground soft and the air smelling of dust and wet earth. Eli Mercer rode down the narrow dirt road that led to Maria Alvarez's small homestead. His horse's hooves made dull sounds against the ground, and each step brought him closer to trouble he couldn't ignore. He had been awake since before dawn, unable to rest. He knew Caleb Hardin would not forgive the humiliation from the day before. A man like Caleb lived on pride and power, and Eli had taken both from him with just one sentence. That kind of wound didn't heal, it burned. As Eli reached the edge of Maria's land, he saw smoke rising from a chimney. Maria was already awake, feeding the chickens and trying to act as if everything was normal. But he could see the tension in her movements, the way she looked toward the road every few seconds, as if expecting someone to appear. Eli stopped his horse by the fence and called softly, "Morning, ma'am." Maria looked up, a bit startled, then smiled faintly. Morning, Mr. Mercer, you came early. Didn't sleep much, he said. Heard some talk in town. Caleb's coming today. She froze, her hand still holding the feed bucket. I figured he might. Eli dismounted, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Don't worry, he said, his tone steady. You won't face him alone. Her eyes met his, full of fear but also trust. You shouldn't get yourself in more trouble, Mr. Mercer. Eli gave a small smile. Trouble finds me either way, ma'am. For a while, they worked in silence. Eli helped repair the fence that had been leaning to one side, while Maria packed some of her documents into a small box. Land papers, receipts, and an old letter from her father. The air was heavy, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. By mid-morning, the sound of horses broke the stillness. Maria's face turned pale. Eli straightened, gripping the rail. A group of riders appeared over the hill, 5 men led by Caleb Hardin. He sat tall on his black horse, his coat flapping in the wind, eyes cold as iron. The riders came to a stop near the gate. Caleb dismounted first, brushing dust from his gloves as if he were about to conduct a business meeting. Morning, Mercer, he said with a smirk. Didn't expect to see you here this early. Or at all. Eli stepped forward slowly. Didn't figure you'd come alone. Caleb chuckled. Oh, I brought witnesses. We're here for a simple matter. Miss Alvarez owes me for that loan she took from my store last winter. Ain't that right? Maria stepped closer, holding her papers tight. That loan was paid. I have the receipt. Caleb waved a hand. Those papers don't mean much. You signed under my name and I got the new deed right here. He pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. Eli could see the trick clearly. It was forged, like many of Caleb's business deals. He had used his influence before to steal land from others who couldn't fight back. That's not her signature, Eli said flatly. Caleb's smirk faded slightly. You a lawyer now? No, Eli replied. Just a man who knows right from wrong. The men behind Caleb shifted uneasily. They weren't sure how far this would go. The sheriff hadn't come. Either he'd been warned to stay away or didn't want to get involved. Caleb took a step forward, his voice dropping low. Last warning, Mercer, walk away. This ain't your fight. Eli didn't move. You laid a hand on her yesterday. That made it my fight. A tense silence followed. The wind picked up, whistling through the dry grass. Then Caleb nodded toward one of his men. Take the box from her porch, he ordered. Before the man could move, Eli stepped in front of him, his hand resting on the handle of his knife. The memory of his words from yesterday still hung heavy in the air. One more mark on her. The man hesitated. Caleb's jaw tightened. You gonna pull that knife on all of us, Mercer? Eli's gaze was calm. If I have to. The standoff stretched like a drawn bowstring. The men glanced at each other, unsure if they wanted to risk facing him. Eli wasn't known for boasting, and that made his threat even more real. Maria took a small step forward. Please, she said, her voice trembling but strong. This land is mine. You have no right to it. I've worked every inch of it with my own hands. You can't take it because you feel powerful. Her courage surprised everyone, including Caleb. For the first time, he looked uncertain. But pride is a stubborn thing. You think anyone in this town will stand for you? He said. They all know who runs things here. That's the problem, Eli said quietly. You think running the town means owning it. A sound came from behind them, hooves again. Everyone turned to see the sheriff riding toward them with 2 deputies. He looked uncomfortable, caught between law and conscience. Morning, folks, the sheriff said, dismounting. Heard there's a dispute. Caleb straightened immediately. There's no dispute. Just claiming what's mine. Maria stepped forward and handed the sheriff her papers. He's lying, Sheriff. I paid every cent I owed. He forged a deed. The sheriff glanced at the papers, then at Caleb's. He frowned, looking from one to the other. These signatures don't match, he said after a moment. Caleb's eyes narrowed. You calling me a liar? I'm saying something don't add up, the sheriff replied carefully. We'll need to sort this at the courthouse. Caleb's temper finally broke. You think you can make a fool out of me, Mercer? You and that woman both? He reached for his gun, but Eli moved faster, not with violence, just with sharp warning. His knife flashed as he stepped closer, the blade glinting in the sunlight. Don't, Eli said softly. You pull that trigger and you'll regret it for the rest of your life. The sheriff raised his voice. That's enough. Everyone stand down. For a long, tense moment, no one breathed. Then Caleb slowly lowered his hand, his jaw clenched tight. The sheriff motioned for his deputies to take the documents. "We'll settle this proper," the sheriff said. "If what I see here is true, Miss Alvarez keeps her land. Caleb, you'll answer for forgery." Caleb glared at Eli one last time, his face red with fury. "This ain't over," he hissed. Eli met his gaze. "It is for today." The sheriff escorted Caleb and his men away. As the dust settled, Maria sank to the ground, trembling with relief. Eli knelt beside her, gently helping her up. "It's all right now," he said. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. "You didn't have to do all this." Eli shook his head. "Maybe not, but someone had to." Days passed and the story spread across the county. Some said Eli Mercer had saved a woman from losing everything. Others whispered that he had crossed a dangerous man. But none could deny that for the first time in years, people in that town started speaking up. Caleb Hardin's power began to fade. His men left him one by one, tired of following a man with no honor. The sheriff later confirmed the forgery and Maria's name was cleared. Caleb left town quietly a few weeks later, his pride broken and his reputation gone. Maria kept her land and worked it with renewed strength. She planted new crops that spring and painted her small house white again. Each morning she looked toward the hills where Eli often rode and felt gratitude she couldn't put into words. As for Eli, he didn't seek attention or reward. He went back to his quiet life, mending fences, tending horses, and watching sunsets that seemed a little brighter now. Sometimes he stopped by Maria's place to help fix a broken gate or share a cup of coffee on the porch. Their conversations were simple but full of unspoken understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Maria said softly, "You never told me why you helped me." Eli looked out toward the horizon. "Because once someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. Guess I've been trying to pay that back ever since." She smiled. "You already have." The town slowly returned to peace, but people didn't forget what had happened. They began to believe again that right could stand against wrong, even if the odds were uneven. Children grew up hearing the story of how one cowboy had drawn his blade, not for pride or anger, but to protect what was right. Years later, when Eli Mercer's name was mentioned, folks would nod with quiet respect. Some said he was the last of his kind, a man who didn't talk much but whose word carried the weight of truth. And somewhere beyond the wide, open fields under the same sky that had once watched over their struggle, Maria tended her land with peace in her heart. She never forgot the day a cowboy had stood between her and the storm. For the first time in years she felt free, and the wind that passed through the wheat carried only calm, as if the land itself remembered the courage that had saved it.